Millionaire sees a girl with 2 babies shivering in the cold, rushes them to the hospital, only to discover she is his biological daughter. Before we get into it, if this video found you at the right moment, let me know with your favorite emoji. The blizzard struck Chicago with vengeance that December night, turning the city into a frozen wasteland. William Hartwell pulled his coat tighter as he rushed through the empty streets, his mind heavy with another failed board meeting. At 52, the successful architect felt more alone than ever. That's when he heard it, a soft humming cutting through the howling wind. Behind a dumpster in the alley, he discovered something that would change his life forever. A small girl, no more than 8 years old, sat cross-legged in the snow. Her blonde hair was matted, her clothes torn, but her bright blue eyes held a determination that stopped him cold. In her thin arms, she cradled 2 tiny babies, sharing her only blanket, to keep them warm. "Hey there," Will called softly, kneeling down. "What are you doing out here?" The girl looked up, revealing a small scar across her forehead. "They're cold," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the storm. "I found them crying. Someone left them." Will's heart shattered. 7 years ago, he'd lost everything. His wife Diane and their unborn child in a car accident. Since then, he'd buried himself in work, avoiding any reminder of the family he'd never have. "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Grace," she said simply, then looked down at the babies with fierce protectiveness. "I won't leave them. They need me." As, if on cue, both infants began trembling violently in the freezing air. Grace's eyes filled with panic. "Please," she whispered, looking directly into Will's soul. "Help them." Something stirred deep within William Hartwell, something he thought had died with Diane. Without hesitation, he scooped up Grace and the babies, racing toward his car. But as they drove toward the hospital, Will couldn't shake the strangest feeling. Those blue eyes seemed so familiar, and when Grace had looked at him, it was as if she'd been waiting for him her entire life. The emergency room at Chicago General buzzed with late-night activity. Will carried the babies while Grace walked beside him, her small hand clutching his coat. Her eyes darted around the bright hospital corridors with the wariness of someone who'd learned not to trust easily. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a seasoned pediatrician with graying hair and kind eyes, immediately took charge. As she examined the babies, Grace hovered nearby, watching every movement with intense focus. "They're premature," Dr. Mitchell announced. "Probably born within the last few weeks. Malnourished but stable." She glanced at Grace. "How long have you been caring for them?" "Since this afternoon," Grace replied quietly. "I heard them crying in a box behind the old church on 5th Street. Will watched, amazed, as Grace gently showed the doctor how she'd been keeping the babies warm, sharing her own body heat and making sure they stayed close together. These weren't advanced medical techniques, just the instinctive care of someone who understood survival. "You did everything right," Dr. Mitchell said, genuinely impressed. "Where did you learn to care for babies?" Grace shrugged. "Other kids on the street taught me things. We look out for each other." As the medical team worked, Grace pulled Will aside. Her blue eyes seemed to search his face for something familiar. "I have dreams sometimes," she whispered, "about a tall man who built beautiful buildings. He had kind hands like yours." She paused, looking confused. Do you think he's still looking for his lost family?" Will's breath caught. The way she spoke, the hope in her voice, it stirred something deep and painful within him. Dr. Mitchell approached them with a clipboard. "Mr. Hartwell, we'll need to contact Child Services about Grace and the police about the abandoned infants. This is a complex situation." Grace's eyes widened with fear. "No, I can't leave them. They need me." "It's okay," Will said, surprising himself. "I'll make sure you're all taken care of." But as Grace smiled with relief, Dr. Mitchell pulled Will aside. "There's something unusual about that little girl," she whispered. "Her protective instincts are extraordinary. And the way she looks at you." She paused. "Have you two met before?" Will shook his head, but doubt crept into his mind. Those eyes, that scar, the strange familiarity. What if Grace wasn't just a random child he'd rescued from the storm? The next morning, news of William. Hartwell's dramatic rescue had already spread through Chicago's business circles. In his glass-walled office overlooking Lake Michigan, Marcus Thornfield smiled as he read the morning headlines. Prominent architect rescues children from blizzard. Marcus had been Will's business rival for decades, always second best in contracts and recognition. Now, as the second-largest shareholder in Hartwell Construction, he'd been waiting years for the perfect moment to force Will out and seize control of the company. This was it. His phone buzzed with calls from concerned board members. "Is Will stable enough to lead during this crisis?" they whispered. "Taking in homeless children, what's gotten into him?" Marcus fed their doubts carefully. "William's been struggling since Diane's death. This might be his breaking point. We need to consider the company's future." Meanwhile, at the hospital, Grace sat in the children's ward playroom, coloring quietly while Will handled paperwork. When Marcus arrived with flowers and a practiced smile, Grace immediately tensed. "William, my friend," Marcus boomed, embracing Will. "I came as soon as I heard. Such a heroic thing you did." Grace watched from her corner, her street-honed instincts screaming danger. She'd learned to read people's true intentions. It was how she'd survived. This man's smile didn't reach his eyes, and his voice carried false notes she recognized, from social workers who'd lied to her before. "And this must be the brave little girl," Marcus said, approaching Grace. She shrank back instinctively. "Grace is shy around strangers," Will explained, but he noticed her reaction too. Of course, Marcus nodded sympathetically. "Such trauma she's endured. I hope you've considered the enormous responsibility you're taking on, William. The board is concerned about how this might affect your judgment." Will's jaw tightened. "My personal life doesn't affect my professional capabilities." "Naturally," Marcus replied smoothly. "But 3 children, William. The stress, the sleepless nights, the emotional toll. Even the strongest men can crack under such pressure." After Marcus left, Grace tugged on Will's sleeve. "That man is dangerous," she whispered. "He wants to hurt you." Will knelt down to her. "Level." "What makes you say that?" Grace bit her lip, struggling to explain feelings she didn't fully understand. His smile was like the bad people at the shelters. They pretend to be nice, but they're planning something mean. That evening, Will's phone rang. It was board member Robert Chen. "Marcus called an emergency meeting for tomorrow, Will. He's questioning your mental state, suggesting you might need to step down temporarily. I wanted to warn you." As Will hung up, he realized Marcus had moved faster than expected. The battle, for his company and his newfound family, was about to begin. 3 days later, Will brought Grace to his penthouse apartment while the babies remained under hospital observation. Elena Vasquez, his longtime housekeeper, welcomed them with warm empanadas and gentle Spanish lullabies that seemed to calm Grace's restless spirit. As Grace explored the spacious rooms, Will noticed how she moved differently than expected. Despite years on the street, she instinctively knew not to put her feet on furniture and said please and thank you without being prompted. Where had a homeless child learned such manners? That evening, as Elena tucked Grace into the guest room, the little girl stared at the family photos lining Will's hallway. "I remember having pictures like these," Grace whispered, her voice dreamy. "My daddy used to read me stories every night, and my mommy made cookies that smelled like vanilla. We had a big house with a garden, and Daddy built me a treehouse." Elena exchanged glances with Will. The details were too perfect, too much like scenes from a storybook. "Tell me more about your family," Will said gently, sitting on the bed's edge. Grace's eyes grew distant. "Daddy was tall and had strong hands from building things. Mommy had golden hair like mine, and she sang songs when I was scared." She paused, touching her forehead scar unconsciously. "But then everything went dark, and I couldn't find them anymore." "Grace," Will said carefully, "some of those memories might be dreams. Sometimes when we want something very badly, our minds create beautiful stories." Grace's face crumpled. "But they felt so real. I remember the smell of Daddy's aftershave and Mommy's perfume. I remember being safe." Elena noticed how Grace automatically folded her clothes and made her bed the next morning. Habits that suggested a structured upbringing, not years of survival on Chicago's streets. "Senor Will," Elena whispered later. This Nina. She has been taught proper manners. Someone loved her once and taught her well. That afternoon, Grace found Will's architectural drawings spread across his dining table. She stared at them with fascination, tracing the building lines with her finger. In my dreams, my daddy drew pictures like these, she said softly. He showed me how buildings stood up strong, like families should. Will's heart ached. Whether Grace's memories were real or fantasies born from longing. One thing was clear. She desperately needed the family she'd either lost or never had. Grace, he said, would you like to help me with these drawings? Her face lit up with pure joy. Really? Like a real daddy would? As they worked together, Will realized it didn't matter if Grace's memories were real or imagined. What mattered was building new ones that would be beautiful and true. But deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling that Grace's fantasies contained more truth than anyone realized. The next morning, Will made a decision that would change everything. He called his old friend Detective James Morrison, a grizzled investigator who'd helped him through the darkest days after Diane's death. Jim, I need your help, Will said over coffee at their usual diner. This little girl I found, there's something about her story that doesn't add up. Morrison studied the photos Will showed him. Grace coloring with perfect posture, Grace instinctively organizing his bookshelves, Grace staring longingly at family portraits. Street kids don't behave like this, Will, Morrison said, stroking his grey beard. This child has been loved and taught proper behavior. Recent homelessness doesn't erase years of good upbringing. Can you look into her background? Quietly, Morrison nodded. Give me 48 hours. While Morrison worked his sources, Grace spent her days at Will's office drawing buildings on scraps of paper. She wasn't copying his architectural plans. She simply watched the construction sites visible from his window with intense fascination. Why? Do you like buildings so much? Will asked during lunch. Grace tilted her head thoughtfully. They remind me of safety, strong foundations, walls that protect families. She paused. I used to sit outside construction sites and imagine my real daddy building homes for people. 2 days later, Morrison returned with a manila folder that made Will's blood run cold. Grace Thompson, that's the name she gave her last foster family, Morrison began. She's been in 3 different homes over the past 2 years, not wandering. The streets for years, like she implied. Each time she ran away because she insisted her real father was still alive and looking for her. Will's hands trembled as he opened the folder. Here's where it gets interesting, Morrison continued. I traced her back to a children's psychiatric facility in Springfield. She was admitted 6 years ago as a Jane Doe, a 2-year-old girl, found after a severe car accident. She had traumatic brain injury, amnesia, and no identification. The accident report made Will's vision blur. December 15th, 6 years ago, the same date Diane had died. The facility tried for months to identify her, Morrison explained. No missing persons reports matched. Eventually, they assumed her family had died in the same accident. She stayed there for 4 years before being placed in foster care. Grace's drawing caught Will's eye. A simple house with 2 adults and a little girl, all holding hands under a rainbow. At the bottom, in shaky letters, she'd written, My real family. Jim, Will whispered, his voice breaking. Diane was pregnant when she died. They told me the baby didn't survive, but what if? Morrison leaned forward. Will, I already thought of that. The accident happened on Highway 94, same route Diane took to her doctor's appointments. And this Jane Doe, she had blue eyes and blonde hair, just like Diane, Will finished, staring at Grace's drawing. There's more, Morrison said gently. The scar on Grace's forehead matches the injury pattern described in the Jane Doe medical report. Will felt the world spinning. Could the little girl he'd found in that alley actually be his daughter, the child he'd mourned for 6 years? That night, Will couldn't sleep. Morrison's revelation echoed in his mind. Could Grace truly be his daughter? He was still processing the possibility when his phone rang at 2 a.m. Mr. Hartwell? It was Dr. Mitchell. You need to come to the hospital immediately. One of the babies, Hope, has developed a high fever. Her condition is deteriorating rapidly. Will found Grace already at the hospital, having insisted Elena bring her when she heard the news. The 8-year-old stood outside the NICU, pressed against the glass window, tears streaming down her face. "She's burning up," Grace whispered when Will arrived. "I can see her little body shaking. Why won't they let me help her?" "Grace, the doctors know what they're doing," Will said gently. But Grace spun around with fierce determination. "No, you don't understand." Her voice cracked with desperation. "I've seen babies die before. At the shelter there was a baby who got sick, and the adults said she'll be fine until it was too late. I won't let that happen to Hope." Grace's panic wasn't medical expertise. It was pure maternal instinct mixed with traumatic memories. She pounded on the NICU door until Dr. Mitchell emerged. "Please," Grace sobbed. "She needs help now. Don't wait like they did before. Please don't let her die like the others." Dr. Mitchell knelt down, moved by Grace's raw emotion. "Sweetheart, we're doing everything possible. Your protective instincts are remarkable. Hope is lucky to have someone who cares so much." For the next 6 hours, Grace refused to leave. She sat curled in Will's lap, staring through the window as nurses worked to bring Hope's fever down. When exhaustion finally overtook her, Grace's sleep was troubled. "Mama," she whimpered in her dreams. "Don't go. The car is coming. I can't find you." Will's heart shattered as Grace thrashed in her sleep, reliving fragments of trauma buried deep in her unconscious mind. "Daddy," she whispered, still asleep, "I built you a castle. Why can't you see me?" Dr. Mitchell approached quietly. "Mr. Hartwell, Hope's fever broke. She's going to be fine." She watched Grace's restless sleep. "That little girl has the heart of a mother. Her love for those babies is extraordinary." As dawn broke over Chicago, Will held Grace closer. Whether she was his biological daughter or not, one thing was certain: they belonged together. But Grace's nightmare had revealed more fragments of memory. Something about a car accident, about losing her parents. The pieces were starting to form a picture Will both hoped for and feared to see completed. Monday morning brought unwelcome surprises. Will arrived at his office to find paparazzi photos plastered across Chicago's business newspapers, images of him carrying Grace and the babies from the hospital looking disheveled and emotional. The headlines were brutal: "Hartwell's midlife crisis," and "Architect's mysterious new family raises questions." Marcus had been busy. By noon, Will faced an emergency board meeting. The 12 members of Hartwell Construction's board sat around the mahogany table, their faces grave with concern. "William," board member Patricia Hendricks began, "we're worried about your judgment, taking in 3 children overnight. The media attention is reflecting poorly on our company's stability." Marcus leaned forward with practiced concern. "We're not questioning your heart, Will, but leadership requires clear thinking. You've been under enormous stress and now this sudden responsibility." He gestured at the newspaper photos. "The shareholders are asking difficult questions." "My personal decisions don't affect my professional capabilities," Will insisted, but he could see doubt in several faces around the table. 3 emergency hospital visits in 1 week, Marcus continued smoothly. "Missing the Morrison project. Deadline review. William, you missed our quarterly strategy meeting to sit in a pediatric ward." Robert Chen, Will's longtime ally, shifted uncomfortably. "Will, maybe you need time to adjust to this new situation. Marcus has suggested a temporary leave of absence." "Suggested?" Will's voice hardened. "Or demanded?" That evening, Will brought Grace to his office to collect files. She sat quietly at his drafting table, drawing while he worked. When Marcus unexpectedly arrived with building security, Grace's body language changed instantly. She didn't run or hide. Instead, she watched Marcus with the calculated wariness of someone who'd learned to read predators. Her small hands stopped moving. Her breathing became shallow and her eyes tracked Marcus's every gesture. "Working late again, William," Marcus said with false cheerfulness. "And with a child present. Is this really appropriate for a corporate environment?" Grace tugged Will's sleeve and whispered urgently, "He's taking pictures with his phone. Why?" Will looked up sharply. Marcus quickly pocketed his device, but Grace had been right. He'd been documenting Will's unprofessional behavior. "For the board. That man lies with his whole body," Grace told Will later in the car. His smile goes the wrong way and his eyes look angry, even when he's pretending to be nice. He wants to hurt our family. As they drove home, Will realized Grace's street survival skills had given her an advantage adults often lacked, the eye ability to see past deception. But Marcus was playing a dangerous game, and Will was beginning to understand just how far his rival would go to destroy him. Morrison's call came at midnight, 3 days later. His voice was shaky, exhausted from hours of digging through old records. "Will, you need to sit down, I found it. Grace's original birth certificate." Will's heart pounded as Morrison continued. "Grace Elizabeth Hartwell, born December 3rd, 8 years ago. Parents listed as William James Hartwell and Diane Marie Hartwell." The phone slipped from Will's hands. After 6 years of grief, 6 years of believing his child had died with Diane, she'd been alive all along, lost, forgotten, surviving on the streets while he mourned her. "There's more," Morrison said when Will picked up the phone. "The hospital made a critical error. When Diane's car was hit by that drunk driver, Grace was thrown from the vehicle. She was found 50 yards away, unconscious, with severe head trauma. In the chaos, no one connected the injured toddler to the pregnant woman who died." Will's legs gave out. He sank into his chair, overwhelmed by the magnitude of this revelation. "Grace spent 4 months in a coma," Morrison continued. "When she woke up, she had complete amnesia. No memory of her name, her family, nothing. The hospital had no way to identify her, so she became Jane Doe. After 2 years of unsuccessful attempts to find relatives, she was transferred to the psychiatric facility. That night, Will sat beside Grace's bed, watching her sleep peacefully. His daughter, his miracle, had been right there in that alley waiting for him to find her. The next morning, Morrison arrived with a manila envelope containing photos from Diane's belongings. When he showed Grace a picture of her mother, holding baby clothes, Grace's eyes widened with sudden recognition. "Mama," she whispered, touching the photo with trembling fingers. She sang to me. Vanilla cookies. She smelled like flowers. Tears streamed down her face as buried memories began surfacing. The car was so loud and then everything went dark. "Grace," Will said gently, kneeling beside her, "I'm your daddy. Your real daddy." Morrison cleared his throat. "Will, there's something else. I tracked down the baby's mother, Carmen Rodriguez. She's a 23-year-old single mother with terminal cancer. She left hope and faith at that church because she knew she was dying and had no family to care for them." Grace looked up, at Will with those familiar blue eyes, Diane's eyes. "Are we going to help them too, Daddy? Like a real family?" For the first time in 6 years, William Hartwell felt complete. Marcus Thornfield had always prided himself on gathering information, but the phone call from his contact at Chicago General Hospital exceeded his wildest expectations. "You're not going to believe this," whispered Janet Mills, a disgruntled hospital administrator who owed Marcus several favors. "That little girl Hartwell rescued? She's his biological daughter. The DNA test came back positive this morning." Marcus leaned back in his leather chair, his mind racing with possibilities. "Are you certain?" "Absolutely. She was presumed dead in the same accident that killed his wife 6 years ago. Turns out she survived with amnesia and has been in the system ever since. The whole thing's being kept quiet while they sort out the legal mess." After hanging up, Marcus stared out at the Chicago skyline, formulating his strategy. This wasn't just gossip. This was ammunition. The next morning, Marcus requested a private meeting with Will. They met at the downtown club where Chicago's business elite made their deals, away from prying ears. "William," Marcus began, sipping his scotch, "I've learned something fascinating about your recent family expansion." Will tensed, sensing danger. "What are you talking about? Your miracle rescue in the snow, the lost little girl you've taken in?" Marcus smiled coldly. "She's not just any orphan, is she? She's Grace Elizabeth Hartwell. Your daughter presumed dead for 6 years. The blood drained from Will's face. "How did you find out?" "Information flows freely when you know the right people." Marcus leaned forward. "Here's my concern, William. The board doesn't know this yet, but when they do, they'll have questions, disturbing questions. Such as, what kind of mental state leads a man to rescue his own daughter without recognizing her?" Was this elaborate coincidence, or has grief finally broken your mind completely? Marcus's voice dripped with false sympathy. Some might suggest you've had a complete psychological break. Others might wonder if you somehow knew who she was all along. Will's hands clenched into fists. You bastard! The media will have a field day, Marcus continued. Prominent architect loses family, then mysteriously finds them years later. The conspiracy theories alone will destroy your credibility. And 3 children, William. A traumatized daughter, 2 abandoned babies. The board will see a man desperately, grasping at a fantasy family to fill the void in his shattered psyche. Marcus pulled out a folder thick with documents. I'm prepared to make this all go away. Resign from the company. Sell me your shares at current market value. Walk away quietly. And I'll ensure this story never reaches the wrong ears. And if I refuse? Marcus's smile turned predatory. Then by Friday, every major newspaper in Chicago will receive an anonymous tip about the architect who's lost his grip on reality. Your reputation, your company, your ability to care for those children, all of it will be questioned publicly. As Marcus stood to leave, he placed a hand on Will's shoulder with mock concern. You have 48 hours to decide, old friend. Choose wisely. Will called Morrison immediately after Marcus left, his voice tight with rage and desperation. Jim, Marcus is trying to destroy me. He knows about Grace's identity and is threatening to twist it into some kind of psychological breakdown story. I need evidence, proof that this was genuine coincidence, not some elaborate delusion. Morrison met Will at his apartment that evening, armed with boxes of medical records and legal documents. Elena served them coffee while Grace played with the babies in the living room, unaware of the storm brewing around her. Here's what we know, Morrison began, spreading papers across Will's dining table. Grace wasn't mysteriously lost for 6 years. She spent 4 years at Riverside Psychiatric Facility for Children. The records show gradual recovery from severe post-traumatic amnesia. Eleanor, who'd been quietly listening, set down her coffee cup with determination. Senor Morrison, I must tell you something. The moment I saw this Nina, I knew she looked familiar. Will looked up sharply. What do you mean? Her eyes, her little nose, the way she tilts her head when thinking. She is the exact image of Senora Diane at that age. I have seen Diane's childhood photos many times. Elena's voice grew stronger. I said nothing because I thought my old eyes were playing tricks, but deep in my heart I suspected. Morrison scribbled notes. That's important testimony, Elena. It establishes that Grace's resemblance to the Hartwell family was obvious to someone who knew them well. The next morning, Morrison and Will drove to the south side to meet Carmen Rodriguez. They found her in a small hospice care facility, frail but alert. When they explained the situation, Carmen's eyes filled with tears. I didn't abandon my babies. Randomly, she said firmly despite her weakened voice. I researched that area for weeks. I knew about the church's community outreach, the foot traffic, the likelihood someone would find them quickly. She grabbed Will's hand. I chose that spot because I knew good people passed through there. When I heard a little girl found them first, it broke my heart, but also gave me peace. Why there specifically? Morrison asked. My sister volunteers. At that church sometimes. She told me about the neighborhood, how families walk through there even in bad weather. I couldn't care for hope and faith anymore, but I made sure they'd be found by someone with a caring heart. Back at Will's office, Morrison compiled their evidence. Medical records proving Grace's amnesia was genuine, Elena's testimony about obvious family resemblance, Carmen's deliberate choice of location, and most importantly, documentation of Will's own psychological evaluations after Diane's death, all showing complete mental stability. Marcus thinks he can paint you as delusional, Morrison said, but the facts tell a different story. This wasn't fantasy or breakdown. It was an incredible coincidence backed by solid evidence. Will felt hope returning. They had the truth. On their side. Now they just had to fight for it. The DNA results arrived on a grey Thursday morning. Dr. Mitchell called Will personally, her voice warm with relief and wonder. Mr. Hartwell, the paternal DNA test is conclusive. Grace Elizabeth is your biological daughter. The probability is 99.97%. Will sank into his office chair, overwhelmed by the scientific confirmation of what his heart had already known. Across the room, Grace sat drawing pictures of their growing family, herself, Will, Hope and Faith, all holding hands under a bright sun. Morrison arrived an hour later with additional medical documentation from Riverside Psychiatric Facility. "Will, these records are your smoking gun," he said, spreading them across the desk. They detail Grace's entire recovery process, how her amnesia gradually lifted over 4 years of therapy. The files painted a heartbreaking picture: a 2-year-old girl who woke from a coma speaking only fragments, who took months to remember basic words, who slowly rebuilt her vocabulary and motor skills. Her memories returned in emotional waves rather than specific details, feelings of safety, love and loss without faces or names attached. "Look at this," Morrison pointed to a therapy note from 3 years prior. Dr. Rebecca Foster wrote, "Patient continues to speak of missing family, but memories remain emotionally based rather than factual. She remembers feeling loved and secure, remembers laughter and bedtime stories, but cannot recall faces or specific events." Meanwhile, Elena had returned to the hospice to speak with Carmen, bringing photos of Hope and Faith thriving under Will's care. Carmen wept with relief when she saw the pictures. "They're so beautiful and healthy," Carmen whispered, her voice barely audible. "I prayed every night that someone would love them like their own." "God answered my prayers through that little girl's brave heart." Elena held Carmen's fragile hand. "Senor Will wants you to know that Hope and Faith will always know about their brave mama who loved them enough to find them a safe family." That evening, Will showed Grace the DNA results, explaining them in simple terms she could understand. "This paper proves what we already felt in our hearts," he said gently. "You're my daughter, Grace. You always were." Grace studied the official document, then looked up at Will with those piercing blue eyes. "I remember feelings about you," she said softly. "Before I knew who you were, being near you felt like coming home, like my heart recognized you even when my brain couldn't." She paused, touching a photo of Diane that Will kept on his desk. "I think Mama's watching us. I think she helped me find you in that storm." As father and daughter embraced, Will realized the most important confirmation hadn't come from science or documents. It had come from love, recognizing love, even across years of separation and loss. 2 weeks after Marcus's ultimatum, the custody hearing began in Cook County Family Court. Judge Margaret Sullivan, a stern woman in her 60s with decades of experience in child welfare cases, presided over the packed courtroom. Will sat at the plaintiff's table with his attorney, Rachel Torres, while Child Services presented their case for Grace's placement. The state argued that while Will was clearly Grace's biological father, his sudden acquisition of 3 children raised questions about his preparedness and stability. "Your Honor," Attorney Torres began, "Mr. Hartwell isn't seeking to adopt unknown children. He's reclaiming his daughter who was lost due to a tragic hospital error and providing care for 2 infants who desperately need stability." She presented the evidence methodically. DNA results, medical records from Riverside Psychiatric Facility, Elena's testimony about Grace's obvious family resemblance, and psychological evaluations proving Will's mental stability. Grace took the witness stand wearing a simple blue dress Elena had bought her. Judge Sullivan spoke gently, adjusting her approach for the 8-year-old's age. "Grace, can you tell me how you feel living with Mr. Hartwell?" "He's my daddy," Grace said simply, her voice clear and confident. "I remember feeling safe before, and I feel safe with him now. He reads to me and helps me with homework. He loves Hope and Faith too, like family should. Are you happy there?" Grace nodded earnestly. "Before, I was always looking for something missing. Now I found it. Daddy makes me pancakes on Sundays, and Elena teaches me Spanish songs. We're a real family." Judge Sullivan smiled gently at Grace's honest testimony. Then came the unexpected revelation. Morrison had discovered Marcus's blackmail attempt through phone records and witness statements. Attorney Torres presented evidence of Marcus's corporate manipulation and threats. "Your Honor, Mr. Thornfield attempted to use private medical information to coerce Mr. Hartwell into selling his business shares. This isn't about child welfare, it's about corporate greed." Marcus's attorney tried to minimize the damage, but board member Robert Chen testified about Marcus's pattern of manipulation and his threats against Will's reputation. Mr. Thornfield explicitly stated he would destroy Mr. Hartwell's credibility unless he resigned, Chen testified. This was extortion, pure and simple. After 3 days of testimony, Judge Sullivan rendered her decision. This court finds that Mr. Hartwell has demonstrated both biological rights and genuine capability to care for Grace. However, given the complexity of this situation, I'm granting temporary custody for 3 months while comprehensive family evaluations are completed. Will's heart sank slightly, not the immediate resolution he'd hoped for. Furthermore, Judge Sullivan continued, Child Services will monitor the placement of the infant twins separately. Mr. Hartwell may petition for adoption after the initial assessment period. As they left the courthouse, Grace slipped her hand into Will's. Temporary means we're together while they make sure, right, Daddy? Will squeezed her hand. Right, sweetheart, and we're going to prove we're meant to be a family. 3 months later, the family evaluations were complete, and Judge Sullivan granted Will permanent custody of Grace. But the real work was just beginning. Marcus faced the corporate board's wrath when evidence of his blackmail scheme became public. Robert Chen led the vote to remove him from all executive positions, though criminal charges weren't pursued due to lack of concrete evidence of monetary extortion. The board has lost confidence in your judgment and ethics, Chen announced. During the emergency meeting, your resignation is effective immediately. Marcus cleaned out his office in bitter silence, his decades-long rivalry with Will finally ending in his own professional disgrace. Meanwhile, Will struggled with the reality of balancing parenthood and running a major company. Grace attended therapy twice weekly with Dr. Amanda Foster, working through years of trauma and abandonment fears. She's making excellent progress, Dr. Foster told Will after a session. But Grace still experiences night terrors and separation anxiety. This adjustment will take time, possibly years. Indeed, Grace often woke screaming from nightmares about losing her family again. Some mornings, Will arrived at work exhausted from comforting her through panic attacks. The adoption process for Hope and Faith proved even more complex. Social. Worker Sandra Martinez visited monthly, documenting every aspect of their care. Mr. Hartwell, twins require enormous resources, Martinez explained during her 4th visit. We need to ensure you understand the long-term commitment. Daycare, medical expenses, education costs. This will impact every aspect of your life. Will felt the weight of responsibility crushing him. Several major projects at work suffered delays as he attended court hearings, therapy sessions, and medical appointments. His assistant, Margaret, worked overtime to reschedule meetings that conflicted with family obligations. Sir, Margaret said gently one afternoon, the Morrison Corporation is threatening to cancel their contract if you miss another deadline review. That evening, Will sat at his kitchen table surrounded by legal documents, medical forms, and architectural plans. Elena found him there at midnight, head in his hands. Senor Will, she said softly, parenting is the hardest job in the world, even for those who get 18 years to prepare. You are doing the impossible, becoming father to 3 children overnight. Grace appeared in the doorway in her pajamas, holding her stuffed elephant. Daddy, are you okay? Will looked at his daughter's concerned face and realized something profound. The company could hire project managers, but these children needed him specifically. I'm perfect now, sweetheart, he said, lifting her onto his lap. Just figuring out how to be the best daddy I can be. 8 months after the custody hearing, Will finally received approval to adopt Hope and Faith. But by then he understood this was just the beginning of a lifelong journey that would test every ounce of strength he possessed. 1 year later, the Hartwell household had found its rhythm, though not without continued challenges. Grace sat in Dr. Foster's office, coloring while discussing her latest progress. The nightmares only happen twice a week now, Grace reported matter-of-factly. And I don't check Daddy's room every hour anymore to make sure he's still there. Doctor, Foster smiled warmly. That's significant improvement, Grace. How do you feel about the new school year starting? Nervous but excited, Grace admitted. Elena is teaching me to make lunch for Hope and Faith. I want to help take care of them like a big sister should. At home, Will marveled at how much had changed. Grace had grown 2 inches and gained weight, her hollow cheeks now round and healthy. She participated in family decisions, with the wisdom of someone older, but the enthusiasm appropriate for a 9-year-old. "Daddy, can we paint Hope and Faith's room yellow instead of pink?" Grace asked one Saturday morning. Elena says yellow is happy for both boys and girls, and they might not always want pink. The twins, now healthy toddlers, followed Grace everywhere, calling her Ace since they couldn't pronounce Grace properly. Their bond had deepened over months of shared bedtime stories and countless hours of Grace teaching them to stack blocks. And color. 6 months earlier, Carmen Rodriguez had passed away peacefully at the hospice. Grace had insisted on attending the small funeral service, holding Will's hand tightly as they said goodbye to the woman who'd given them hope and faith. "She was brave like you, Daddy," Grace had whispered at the graveside. "She made sure her babies found love, even though it made her sad." Will's architectural firm had stabilized under new management structure. Instead of trying to do everything himself, he'd hired 2 project managers and restructured his schedule around family obligations. During evening family meetings, Grace contributed ideas about their charitable plans. After 18 months of careful planning, Will was finally ready to launch the Hartwell Family Foundation, smaller and more focused than originally envisioned. "What should our foundation help with first?" Will asked during one of their dinner discussions. Grace considered. "Seriously, kids in hospitals who don't have families visiting them, and maybe families who get separated in accidents so they can find each other faster." Her suggestions came from genuine experience, not impossible wisdom beyond her years. Eleanor often found Will reading bedtime stories to all 3 children, Grace translating simple words for the twins in her patient, nurturing way. "Look how far we've all come," Eleanor told Will one evening as they watched Grace help Faith with a puzzle. "This is what healing looks like, slow, steady, and full of love." Will nodded, finally understanding that building a family was like constructing any lasting structure. It required strong foundations, patience, and daily maintenance. But the results were worth every sleepless night and challenging day. 3. Years after that snowy December night, William Hartwell stood before a packed auditorium at Chicago's Children's Hospital, Grace beside him at the podium. At 11 years old, she was poised but still wonderfully childlike, her blue eyes bright with confidence. She wore a simple navy dress that Elena had helped her choose, and her blonde hair was neatly braided with a small blue ribbon that matched her eyes. "When I found Grace in that alley," Will began, his voice steady but emotional, "I thought I was saving her. I didn't know she was saving me." The audience of social workers, medical professionals, and families listened intently as Will shared their journey. The miraculous reunion, the custody battles, the slow healing process that had transformed them all. He spoke about the night terrors that had gradually faded, the therapy sessions that rebuilt Grace's trust, and the countless small moments that had woven them together as a family. "There were days when I wondered if I was enough," Will admitted, his voice catching slightly. "Days when Grace would wake up screaming, convinced I would disappear like everyone else in her life. Days when the twins needed more than I thought I could give." Grace stepped forward when Will nodded to her, placing a gentle hand on the microphone. "I want to tell other kids something important," she said, her voice clear and strong. "Even when you feel lost and scared, don't give up. Sometimes your family is looking for you too, and love finds a way." She paused, looking out at the audience with remarkable composure. "I spent years trying to remember faces and names, but what I really needed to remember was how love feels. When I met my daddy again, my heart knew him before my mind did." Her words were simple but profound, spoken with the wisdom of someone who'd lived through loss and found hope again. A woman in the front row wiped tears from her eyes, and Will noticed several other audience members reaching for tissues. Dr. Foster, Grace's therapist, smiled proudly from her seat in the 3rd row. The Hartwell Family Foundation had spent 3 years quietly helping 50 families navigate similar crises, funding family reunification services, supporting children in psychiatric facilities, and providing emergency assistance for families separated by tragedy. We learned that miracles aren't magic, Will continued. They're the result of people refusing to give up on each other. Our foundation recently helped reunite the Peterson family after their daughter was misidentified following a bus accident. We funded therapy for 8 children who aged out of psychiatric care without family support. We provided housing assistance for families who lost everything while searching for missing children. Grace added, "Every family we help teaches us something new about love. Some families look like ours, people who found each other by accident. Others are grandparents raising grandchildren, or foster families who became forever families. Love doesn't have just one shape." In the audience, Elena wiped tears from her eyes as she watched 4-year-old Hope and Faith color quietly in their seats, supervised by a volunteer. The twins had grown into confident, happy children who called Will Papa and Grace their big sister. Hope's dark curls bounced as she concentrated on staying within the lines, while Faith carefully selected each crayon color with the methodical precision she'd inherited from Carmen. After the presentation, a young social worker approached Grace, while Will spoke with Dr. Mitchell, who had remained a close family friend. "Thank you for sharing your story. I work with kids who've lost their families, and your words will help them believe in hope." Grace smiled, her face lighting up with genuine warmth. "Tell them that sometimes families look different than you expect, but love is love. My daddy built me a new life, and we built a family together." She paused thoughtfully. "And tell them it's okay to be scared sometimes. I still get scared, but now I know I'm not alone." The social worker knelt down to Grace's level. "What helped you the most during the hard times?" "Elena's hugs," Grace answered immediately. "And Daddy reading to me every night, even when I was too upset to listen. And knowing that Hope and Faith needed me to be brave. Sometimes taking care of someone else helps you heal too." That evening, the family gathered for their traditional Sunday dinner at the long oak table Will had bought specifically for their growing family. As Will looked around the table, Grace helping Faith cut her chicken, Hope chattering about her favorite songs from preschool, Elena bringing fresh tortillas from the kitchen, he marveled at the journey. "Tell us again about the snow day," Faith requested, as she did most Sunday evenings. At 4 years old, she loved hearing the story of how their family came together. Grace launched into the familiar tale, her voice animated as she described the blizzard, the crying babies, and the tall man who appeared like a guardian angel. "And then Papa carried us all to safety, and we became a family," she concluded, making Hope clap her hands with delight. "And Elena taught us to make cookies," Hope added, her contribution to the family story. "And Dr. Foster taught us that feelings are okay to have," Grace continued, referencing the family therapy sessions that had helped them all adjust. Elena served her famous flan for dessert, watching with satisfaction as the children's faces lit. "This recipe belonged to mi abuela," she told them as she did every time. "Now it belongs to our family, too." 3 years ago, Will had been a lonely, successful businessman who'd lost everything that mattered. Now he was a father, learning daily that love multiplied rather than divided when shared. His company had thrived under the new management structure that allowed him to prioritize family time. The Morrison project had been completed successfully, and 3 new contracts had been signed with clients who specifically chose Hartwell Construction because of Will's reputation for integrity. "Grace," he said, as they cleaned dishes together. Later, a nightly ritual they both treasured. "Do you remember what you told me that first night? About finding your lost family?" Grace dried a plate thoughtfully, her movements careful and precise. "I remember feeling like I was meant to find you, like Mama somehow guided us to each other." She paused, smiling. "Maybe that's how love works. It never really disappears. It just finds new ways to grow." She handed him the dried plate and reached for another. "Daddy, do you think Mama would be proud of our family?" Will's throat tightened with emotion. "I think she'd be amazed by the strong, caring young woman you've become. And I think she'd love Hope and Faith like her own daughters." "Eleanor says Mama's love lives on in how we love each other," Grace said simply. I like thinking about that. As Will tucked his children into bed that night, he followed the same routine they'd established over 3 years. First Hope, who always requested 2 songs and 3 kisses. Then Faith, who needed her stuffed elephant positioned just right and the closet light left on. Finally Grace, who still sometimes needed extra reassurance that tomorrow would come and their family would still be together. "Daddy," Grace whispered as he pulled her blanket up to her chin, "I'm proud of our presentation today. Do you think we helped people?" "I know we did, sweetheart. Your courage in sharing our story will give hope to children who need it most." Grace nodded sleepily. "Good. That's what families do. They help each other and help other people too." As Will turned off the light and headed to his own room, he understood the most important lesson his unexpected family had taught him. Sometimes the greatest construction projects aren't buildings at all. Sometimes they're the families we build. One day of love at a time with patience, commitment, and the unshakable belief that love always finds a way home.